Let's learn how to use GridMaker. Graph paper created with GridMaker is a terrific alternative to pulling out a sheet of 1/4-inch paper and all the tedious drafting that involves. Even better, a GridMaker paper can be saved to the Paint tool where you can add color and annotations to plan projects. I'll start with a general tour of the app, and then together we'll create a couple of graph papers so you can see GridMaker in action. The app opens to this page. On the left, you'll notice an icon labeled Quick Picks. Moving along to the right are the 3 included papers, grid, dots, diagonal, followed by a number of specialty graph papers that can be added. Going back over to the left is the Quick Pick icon. What is a Quick Pick? It's a predefined graph paper that can be used as is or edited. They are intended to be both inspirational and a quick start to creating unique papers. I'll switch to the small icon view and scroll through the list. There are examples made from every graph paper, including papers I have not purchased. All right, let's go back to the main page. Along the top are 2 buttons. You'll see More in the upper right throughout GridMaker. On this page, More has a few administrative resources. There are also 2 controls I want to point out. The first one is at the top, Default Paper Settings. Here's where the defaults are set for new papers. Size of the page, choice of inch or metric units in centimeters or millimeters, and for papers shared as a PDF, the default line weight. All of these defaults can be overridden on an individual paper. So if a particular paper is unique, open the More button on that paper and make the changes to its paper settings. At the bottom of every More is Help. Help has the tips, links, and videos that are helpful on a particular page. Here, Help has a reminder about how to set paper defaults, this video, and a detailed video on Quick Picks. Also at the top right is the File Folder button. The folder has a complete listing of all your papers. More in File Folder has tools to duplicate and delete papers. You can also long press a paper to open a duplicate, delete, and rename for just that single paper. Let's jump in and create a graph paper. To create a graph paper, I begin by choosing the paper I want and tapping on its icon. If I'm interested in a paper that is locked, I can just tap, purchase, and begin work. Let's unlock the hexagon graph paper and create a graph paper for a hex map. Notice that the cost to buy this locked paper is the same as the price of the original app. And it's worth mentioning that once you've bought 5 additional papers, all the papers become unlocked and you'll never pay for any new papers as they are added. The hex paper is now unlocked, so I can tap to open it. To start creating a new paper, I'll tap the plus, which opens the edit screen. Every graph paper opens the same way, a starter layout to the left, and on the right is the toolbar. The top tool is highlighted, so a tap anywhere opens it. Here are the controls for the overall pattern and size. Looking at the options, I can create a grid with a choice of layouts, with either flat top or pointy top hexagons. Let's adjust the size from 1 inch to a 1/4 inch. And by choosing configurable hexagons, I can make the hexagons just a bit taller by adjusting the setting to 3/8 of an inch. Next on the toolbar is spacing. I can add spacing by increasing its size from 0. One way to get back to no spacing is to use the undo button at the top of the page to step back to an earlier version. The next 2 options make it easy to divide a hexagon. Tap a color to turn on a division. I've decided against a division, and I'll remove it with a tap to the green color tile, which closes the color and stops the display of the divide. Let's check out labels. Tap a color to turn on labels, and using the controls, I can adjust the size of the label, choose where the label starts, and whether to use numbers or letters. Placing a center point is an option on some hex papers. Next is image. There can be many projects that dropping an image behind a graph paper would be helpful. Just tap Add Image to begin the process to find an image on your device. It also has controls to resize the image and adjust its placement. The palette gives you control over the color of the lines in your graph paper. It opens with the current palette selected. From there, you can scroll through the additional palettes or add your own custom palette. To create a custom palette, just tap Add. The app will use the palette selected when the ad was tapped as the starting point. Set a name if you'd like, and then create your palette. Colors are set by either changing the RGB numbers, also by increasing or decreasing the value until you see the color you want. Notice in the paper layout to the left that the line colors have instantly updated with the first color. The first color on the new palette replaces the green lines because green is the first color in the default palette. On to text, it has controls to edit the name of the paper and to add a title on the paper with a choice of font and placement controls. The very last icon in the toolbar is page settings. As I think about printing or sharing, I check the paper size, the orientation, portrait or landscape, and the margins. Notice that on the layout to the left, there is a dotted blue line. It shows the print margins when I'm in page settings. It's helpful to know that GridMaker can adjust the graph paper grid so it fits within the margins. This means you can use the margin settings to control the overall size of the graph paper. By making a small adjustment to the side margins, I can add columns to my design. Finally, let's look at the More button on this paper. First is Paper Settings to override the default settings for this paper. Next are the 4 options to share your paper: Share, PDF, Image, and Print. The first, Share, transfers the file to open it on another device running GridMaker. PDF opens the paper as a PDF, which can then be shared. Image exports the paper as a PNG with a few adjustments to the background and image size. Finally, Print launches printing. There is one caveat on printing. You should be aware that the transfer of a paper to a printer can sometimes introduce slight distortions. Usually this doesn't matter. However, for some projects, you'll need the grid to print to the exact size. When this is the case, print a test page and then use a ruler to measure a side to confirm that it is exactly as you expected. For this paper, I'd expect the top side of the hexagon to be 1/4 inch. If it's not, I'll need to take a moment and find the right combination of settings. If the test page doesn't print at the exact size, open More to open Help. In the Help pop-up, there is a link to guidance on how to print a grid at its exact size. It is the first link listed, Exact Scale Printing. Before we leave this paper, I do want to point out the one button along the top that we haven't talked about, the Paintbrush. Paintbrush saves the graph paper at a choice of 3 sizes and opens it in a new set of tools to color and annotate the paper. Once a paper is brought into Paint, the grid is frozen, which means that later, if you realize you need to change the grid, you'll need to leave Paint, make edits to the grid, and bring the revised paper into Paint and begin again. Open More and open Help to learn more about how to use Paint. Leaving Paint, we are returned to the list for hexagon papers. Our new paper has been added with the default name, and the Paint version has been added with a green paintbrush badge. Let's go back to the main menu and look at one more paper. Let's open Grid. I'll tap the plus to add a new paper, and right away you'll notice the Grid toolbar on the right is different from the toolbar we had for creating the hexagon paper. Scanning the toolbar from the bottom, we recognize the standard tools generally available on all the papers. At the top of the toolbar are the tools unique for a particular paper. The main control is always first. The Grid 1 menu has a rows and columns switch to make it easy to create a grid with a specific number of rows and columns. If I turn off the square switch, I can create a grid with rectangles. I'll set this major grid to 1 inch and use a minor grid to divide it. Before we go on, I'm going to adjust the line weight of the major grid to heavy so it is easy to see. Grid 2 adds a minor grid by turning on a blue color. I'll set the minor grid to 5 per major. Grid 3 would divide the minor grid. The subdivision is added by turning on a line color. With just a few taps, I've created a grid paper with a 1/5 grid. Let's explore a few of the unique tools on the grid. Look down the toolbar for axes. Turn on a line color to add axes. I can set the color, line weight, placement of axes on the page, and adjust the origin. Other tools can vary between papers. For example, labels. Here on grid paper, the tap of a color adds labels to the axes, with controls to set the size of the labels and the stepping. Next is center point. Much as you'd expect, by default, it marks the center of the graph paper with controls to adjust placement. I'm going to remove the center point with a tap to the green tile to close it. Let's make one more adjustment. I'd like this graph paper to have fine lines. The colors and line weights I have now make the grid hard to use. I'm going to use color to improve this grid. Looking to the toolbar on the right, I find the palette. Opening palette, I'll move the picker to the green set of colors. Notice that the paper layout to the left, the line colors instantly updated with the new colors. Going back to grid 1, I'll set the line weight to thin and to the third color. Next, I'll open grid 2 and set its color to the lightest shade and line weight. Finally, I want to adjust the axes. It is already set to the darkest green. However, I do want to set the line weight to light. And I'll check the settings on the labels. With the fine line grid, I can set the labels to the smallest size. And now I've got the fine line grid I wanted. That's the overview on how to use GridMaker. Enjoy exploring all the tools and other papers. If you have questions or find you can't quite create the paper you need, please contact us and we'll try to help.